Right, these are the sort of plants we want to grow for food. We've got true root crops like parsnips, beetroot, carrots, which are always sown where they're to grow, because if we transplant them we break this taproot and they grow misshapen. So roots always are put where they're going to grow, good soil, left undisturbed. The other thing that we want to put where it's going to grow are things that grow quickly, because transplanting will always cause a check to growth.
Right.
Things that we want to grow fast without a check, we put them where they're going to grow. So these quick growing salads will go straight where they are. Things that take longer to come to harvest, and particularly at wide spacing, makes more sense to sow them in a small space, either in a very nice bit of seed bed, or I tend to use a separate pot with bought compost, so I don't need to worry about weeds.
Yeah.
And then as they grow, I transplant them, put maybe in a cell pack, and then out at final spacing. If you imagine these cabbages will finish up at about a foot square. Well, if I plant one seed every foot, the seedling will just disappear among the weeds. We spend all our time weeding out the weeds and we'll probably kill our plants as we're doing it. But by having them, sowing them separately and then planting them out, it gives us more time to get the ground prepared. And if we've got the ground prepared nicely like this already, it gives time for the weeds to grow and us to hoe them off. Because if we've got fertile soil, we will always have some weeds amongst it. So if we look closely at some of these seeds, carrot, beetroot just about big enough that we can handle individual seeds. Parsnip, we can definitely handle individual seeds, so we can actually put seeds in at the final spacing. We don't need to worry about thinning. Lettuce, well, some people with very delicate fingers might be able to space sow those, but I would much rather sprinkle them over the surface and then move them out later. Say these quick growing salads, got a mixture of seed types there, but they will all grow together, and they've been chosen to grow at all at about the same sort of speed.
Right.
It'll be interesting when we do sow things, according to the temperature of the soil, they will come up at different speeds. Some things will germinate quite like cabbages, will germinate quite happily when the soil is cool. Carrots and parsnips will wait for the soil to warm up.
Yeah. It's quite fascinating, the size variation in all of them. You know, as you said, you've got some that are really, really delicate and will need delicate fingers. And then you've got some, you know, like the beetroot and the parsnip that are actually quite, you know, they're quite large in size and quite easy to see and to separate.
Yes, parsnips particularly. And we're not looking at peas and beans today, but that's the bigger end of our vegetable growing.
Right.
Those are probably the biggest seeds as a vegetable grower that we're likely to handle. So we've looked at the seeds, and now we've moved to where we're going to sow them.
Right.
This ground was dug over earlier in the year and has been allowed to settle. Last night's rain means that it's been thoroughly wetted and the water was soaked down to join up with the water underneath, so the roots can follow it down and it can suck back up. The immediate preparation, just went over it with a hoe and then with a rake to get basically half an inch of nice, loose, crumbly surface into which we can make a drill, put the seeds, cover over, and that moisture is there for the seed to absorb.
Right.
The amount of seed we sowed is relative, basically fixed by how much we're going to eat. There's no point in growing 1,000 carrots if we're only going to eat 50. But if we take the example of a metre row, we can ideally sow 100 carrot seeds along it, and that gives us 100 carrots to eat. With parsnips, we want more space because the parsnip plant is bigger at the time at which we harvest it. So if they're almost touching each other when they're harvested, we've made effective use of the space. And because it's a nice large seed, we'll just put 2 or 3 in a place. 2 or 3 because we can't guarantee that everyone will germinate.
Right.
So when we know that we've got germination, we'll just select and reduce to 1 at each of those spacings. Much the same with the beetroot. We want the beetroot about 5 centimetres apart. So we can sow them at 5 centimetres apart, or maybe slightly closer and harvest some golf ball sized beetroot and then later on some bigger ones.
Right, okay.
For all these seeds, the depth isn't critical, but we don't want to bury them a long way down. A seedling can't make new growth until it's got leaves up in the air seeing green. Till that point it's just using up the food reserves in the seed. But there's quite a bit of tolerance. But what I'm going to do, we're going to take out a small drill. We sow the seeds in straight lines because this soil being rich and fertile, is full of other seeds. And if we were to just sprinkle the seeds, they'd come up mixed with the weeds and we wouldn't know which was which. But this way, if they're in the line, they're the carrots. If they're not in the line, they're the weeds. The spacing between rows is basically controlled by how much space we need. These are nice short rows, so we can put them just wide enough to slide a hoe along. We don't need to put a foot there to walk along the row. With a long row across the plot, we may need to leave more. Now that's a suitable drill for the carrots. If you could take a pinch of the seed and start to sprinkle it along. You're aiming to do a seed about one every centimetre along the row, if you can. Right, so now we've got the seeds gently sprinkled along the row, we just gently cover them over, very lightly firm. The soil to the seed needs to be like a warm blanket to us, because the seed needs to absorb water from the soil, so it needs to be in close contact. We're only sowing a few things, so we don't really need labels, but just for convenience we'll put a label at each end of the row, just to make it clear that we've got something sown there.
And so the parsnips are next then?
Although we know we're sowing them at specific intervals, we'll still take out a drill, because that makes it easier to get them all each at the same depth, to actually see where they are along the row. So having done that, would you like to pick up 2 or 3 seeds?
Because these are considerably larger.
And we can definitely see where they are. And then if I give a hand span,
right?
So we're talking horticultural tolerances. It's not engineering where we use a very accurate tape measure. Hand span is more than adequate for estimating the sort of distances we put these things apart.
Right.
And there we can see where they are. We've put in about a dozen seeds, which when we get germination will reduce to 4 plants. And those 4 plants will give us 4 parsnips to eat in the winter. Move that out the way. As before, lightly cover them over, lightly firm them so that they can absorb the water from the soil. We'll put a label in at each end. Difference between parsnips and carrots. With carrots, we always want to be eating young, tender carrots, so we do successional sowings. Maybe we'll come back after a month, do another sowing, and so on through the season.
Right.
Parsnips, slow growing, we just do one sowing, which we then harvest over an extended period of time. The parsnips don't go tough in the ground.
Yeah.
So we would have done a calculation of how many parsnips we're likely to eat, say between the end of November and Easter.
Okay.
And we would sow for that crop all in one go, and have calculated how much space that would want.
Right.
They are one of our long stay crops, but being a root crop, we don't want to disturb them. We don't want to cause the root to branch by having the taproot damage. We want a nice clean stem.
Right. Well, thank you ever so much, Oz, for another great masterclass. It's been really, really good, really interesting, and it's just great to learn from someone who's actually had that sort of, the experience of it. Me being an amateur, didn't know any of this before, but it's really, really handy, short, sweet, simple tips to get a really good crop. So thank you ever so much.
Okay, and we'll come back again and see how well they do.
Yeah.
Off we go! Refreshment time.